Ex-landlord says he'd see me in court, not realizing I'd be the one bringing him to court. A couple years ago, I was in an apartment with my friend and younger sister. My sister was violent towards my friend and I ended up having to get a restraining order against her. She brought in a dog without permission, which caused some damage to the unit. I informed my landlord of the incidences of violence and the damage and sent him pictures. He basically told me to deal with it myself, which I did by getting the protective order. After this, my roommate questioned the legality of holding us responsible for her portion of rent. Up until this point, our landlord had not asked us to leave due to my sister's actions, but he did after the lease was brought into it. We were out by the date he specified on the notice to quit. My roommate was there until midnight making sure the place was spotless. We moved to an apartment across the street. 2 weeks had passed since he was informed that we had vacated the unit, and we had not gotten anything regarding our security deposit. In our state, a landlord is required by law to either return the remainder of a security deposit within 2 weeks, or provide a letter itemizing what the deposit was used for. If they don't, the tenant is owed the entire deposit. If the withholding is willful, the tenant is owed double the original deposit. The landlord had actually told me that he would be going on vacation immediately after we vacated, so I returned our keys to him and waited to see if he would send anything. He never did. After consulting with the tenants' rights group to be sure I was in the right, I sent a pre-formatted letter 16 days after we vacated, which stated the specific laws regarding security deposits, and gave him our current address to send either the deposit or receipt to. The day after I sent this letter, I saw him across the street, frantically running into the apartment for the first time since we moved out. I received a text from him saying that he would return what's left of our deposit if he could get the apartment rented by the 1st of next month. I respond by telling him that, as the letter I sent explained, he forfeits the right to keep any of the deposit after the 2 weeks is up. He responded saying that he would see us in court and that we were nightmare tenants, and that this will be fun. He said he would also be taking us to court for the cost to relist and rent the apartment, which he claimed exceeded the amount of our deposit. After about a month or two of hearing nothing back, we decided to say F it and file a small claim suit against him, as he clearly wasn't going to follow through on his threats. As the person who had almost all communication with him, I was the plaintiff in the case. He brought a letter that was dated for the day he texted me, where he arbitrarily wrote in what he used the deposit on, and claimed he sent us the letter. That obviously didn't add up, as he had texted me that day saying that we would get some of the deposit returned, and that he had no proof that he actually sent that letter. He clearly just wrote it and printed it out for the court hearing. During the court hearing he also said a lot of false and victim-blaming poop, such as implying that I participated in the violence that occurred, saying we caused damages that were definitely there when we moved in, and just attacking my character in general. The judge ruled that the withholding of the security deposit was willful and awarded us double the deposit. But of course that wasn't the end of it, and a few days before his deadline to pay us the money, he sent me a text just letting me know that the decision has been appealed. I didn't answer and showed up to court again, and lo and behold, it's more mudslinging and arguing about things that we already established in the first hearing. The judge upheld the original decision, and he eventually mailed me the check for double the deposit. In the memo line on the check where you can write the reason for the payment, he wrote, for gaining £20. But hey, I cashed that check and spent my half on a new gaming laptop, so I'd say I got the last laugh. My hypocrite mother sided with my ex-girlfriend after she cheated on me, so I cut both of them from my life. Years later my dad cheated on her and now she wants to apologize. My ex-girlfriend was literally the perfect woman. She was beautiful, smart and caring. She would make me handmade meals, go on dates with me, give me lots of attention. She even helped me out when my grades were starting to slip. I was certain that I was going to propose to her and marry her once we were both out of college. So imagine my surprise when I caught her in bed with another guy. It was her birthday and I had bought a new phone for her along with some flowers. I knew this would impress her because her phone screen had got a crack in it recently. But when I pulled up to her house and knocked on her door, I heard the sound of my girlfriend going at it with another man. I confronted her immediately, yelling and hitting the guy. He ran out like his life was in danger. Meanwhile, my girlfriend begged me and basically recited the cheater's anthem. About how it wasn't what I thought it was, and that she loved me with all her heart. But I knew that the reality was she had cheated on me, and not just once. Devastated, I dropped everything on the ground and ran back home. I don't want to get into it too much, but it was hard on me. I was struggling to even eat because of the horrors of what I had witnessed. When I told my mom what had happened, she looked at me. Yes, she actually laughed at me. She told me that my girlfriend was most likely looking for a new experience, and that she still loves me. She said that my girlfriend had been very nice to me so far, so she deserved to be forgiven for one small mistake. So I shouldn't be a bitch and just talk it out with her instead of crying like a baby. I told her that that's ridiculous, that my girlfriend cheated on me so she doesn't love me. Once again, my mother told me that I needed to just get back with her. She insisted that this was the woman I was going to marry. When I repeatedly told her that I wasn't going to stay in a relationship with a cheater, she gave me an ultimatum. If you don't go back to her and apologize for not picking up her calls, I will tell your father to stop paying your college tuition. At the time, my dad was away on a business trip. But this incident made me realize that my own mother was my enemy. She wanted what was the worst for me. I made the bold decision of cutting her and my ex-girlfriend completely from my life. In the process, I also had to cut all contact with my dad because I really didn't want my mom to be in my life anymore. I discarded my number and deleted all social media. I rented out a small trailer in another city for $200 a month. I also dropped out of college for a year so I could save up enough money to pay for it on my own. I got a job as a cashier first, but was then recruited to work as a bartender in a high-end restaurant. But the hours were terrible and I was always low on energy. I had to sleep during the day and work during the night. Eventually, a year passed of me living on my own. I did save up enough to pay for a community college. It was a huge step down from where I was studying when I had my family helping me pay, but I was going to make the best of what I had. I took as many courses as I could while still balancing my night shifts simultaneously. I met Emily in one of my classes. At first, I constantly compared her to my ex. I said to myself that my ex was perfect and Emily was flawed. Then I cried about what I was thinking. But, thankfully, Emily accepted the broken me. She was like a sun in my darkness, lighting up my life completely. She helped me get over my trauma and ex by helping me pay for therapy. Thanks to her, I was also able to get a scholarship and quit that awful night job that was taking a massive toll on my body. We both graduated together and got jobs that paid decent enough for us to move in an apartment together. I proposed to her on our 4th year anniversary, and she said yes. We had a small marriage, with no big ceremony. In fact, her parents and one of my friends were the only guests present, and we just signed a few papers. But it was still the happiest day of my life. It felt like I had finally achieved something despite almost being screwed over. Now, and I still can't believe I am calling her this, my wife is expecting a baby in around 4 months. Our lives have stabilized and we are both ready to take the next step, raising our own child. By this point, it had been years since I had even thought of my family. So naturally I was dumbstruck when out of nowhere, my mother texted me. Somewhere along the line, I had created a new Facebook account so I could post pictures of me, Emily, and our future baby. But I never thought that my hypocrite mother would find it and use it to contact me. I was expecting her to yell at me, demanding me to come home. But it was the opposite. She was apologizing to me, begging me to forgive her. She admitted that she was wrong, and that she didn't realize how much I was hurting. I won't lie, I was curious as to how a person could change this much, so I asked her straight up what had happened. She confessed that my dad had been cheating on her for over a year. She finally felt the pain that I had to go through and realized that she wanted nothing to do with the person who had hurt her, even if it was her husband. I told her that while I'm sorry for her, I have no desire to rekindle any relationship between us, especially not that of a parent and child. She said that she would do anything I wanted, because she had seen that my wife was pregnant. She wanted to be in her grandchild's life no matter what. I flat out told her that there is no way I am allowing that, and to stop texting me. I have moved on from her and have no need for her artificial care. Then she started saying that she won the house in the divorce, and would sign it over to us if I forgave her. She also said that she has some retirement money saved up, and was going to send it to me as soon as I gave her my contact information. Since I read that, I have just closed my phone and been in deep thought. I don't know how to tell my wife about this. I seriously have no intentions of entertaining my mother's request, but I have also never seen her this desperate. My uncle assaulted my young friends. I made sure he never saw his now ex-wife and children ever again, by getting him banned from a whole country. I plot and plan, what is the worst possible thing I can do at him? I am all consumed. In SA you can pay someone for anything. But I am a big believer of karma, so I know I can't use any nefarious means. I realize I have copies of all of his documents, passports, Namibia and Canada, his ID, with his original name on it, bank statements, showing he had loads of money. He was supposed to send money home to his wife. Before he left he took the proceeds of a car they sold. It was meant for the farm, but he told her he needed it for his sabbatical. He would flip cars in SA and double the money. Then I remember, he changed his name and took her surname so he could get into Canada. So for about a year I went backwards and forwards in my head. Do I report him to the Canadian immigration? What will be the repercussions? I was troubled and torn. I am not a malicious person. I was still effed off and felt like I needed to do something. I am a person of action. Then I heard he had done the same thing to someone extremely close to me, Annie, during the same period as Jane. She only remembered a year later after extensive therapy. So I sat down in front of my laptop and wrote the most detailed, factual, devastating letter of my life. My hands shook the entire time. I put it all in there, the French assault with links to all the newspaper articles, screenshots of messages to me, blanked out, showing he is distributing naked pictures without consent, illegal in SA as well but not much enforcement, a full timeline of his life, highlighting his name change to deliberately deceive the Canadian immigration. I made it very clear in my letter, report, that his behavior had escalated, without recourse. I did not include the affidavits or correspondence from his wife. Even though she knew of his deception, I didn't want her to get into trouble. I pressed send and got very drunk. It was 100% anonymous, so I never got a response. I just carried on my life and helped Annie get better. Jane and my friendship deteriorated beyond repair. She deliberately started dating my brother and has turned him against me. That is a whole other messed up story that I might write about one day, when it stops hurting. I only told Annie what I did this year. I have kept it a secret for about 3 years. I know he has not been able to go back to Canada at all. Banned for life. Part of me feels sorry for his kids and bigger part of me thinks I did them a favor, especially his daughter, who he had started being weird with, saying things like, "Isn't she intimacy for a 13-year-old, you can see the hot woman she will become, etc. Puke 1,000 times. The au pair that he got pregnant was only 18. I am friends with his ex-wife on FB. She is, Facebook, happy. New guy, kids are happy. What's your worst summer camp experience? I took a huge stinking shit at the summer camp I had just started attending, and I was like 13, so I thought that I'd brag to all the guys about it. I named it Gigantoschikus, and that name didn't even do justice to my fecal child. It was easily 13 inches long and was a little less thick than an Arizona iced tea can. To somebody who was 13, this was like a blessing from God. Imagine how cool my bunk mates would think I was when I showed them the shit to end all shits. I was ecstatic. I rolled on the ground to the stall next to me, While my pants weren't on and I had a dirty butt, I didn't want the toilet paper to cover up my magnificent baby after all. So I shimmy into the other stall and start wiping. I wasn't really focused on anything but wiping and then gathering my friends for a show and tell, so the thought of locking the stall I was currently in slipped my mind. So I had no pants on, I was giggling because I was so excited, and I was wiping my butt in an unlocked stall. Not the best situation to be in. Luckily I finished my wipe and decided to slide back under stall walls to the original Holy Land. I crawled about halfway into the other stall when I heard the door that takes you into the bathroom open. I was dead still because I didn't want anyone to get suspicious and start snooping around. I watched with bated breath as the pair of size 11 boots made their way across the floor towards the stalls. I recognized those work boots, they belonged to a big dumb farm boy named Nash. Nash was really big, really dumb, and really didn't like me. It felt like an eternity as he did his big dumb shuffle across the line of stalls. He finally was out of my vision and all I could do was pray. His footsteps stopped somewhere near the stall I was half out of, and I hear the creaking of a stall door. Nash had gone into the stall next to the one I was climbing out of. Nash took a shit that I'm sure rivaled mine, seeing as half the food budget at camp was labeled for Nash. I was starting to get really uncomfortable laying on the ground, so I decided I could risk slowly crawling back into Gigantashika's holding pen. I started my methodical slither when the bathroom door opened again. "Hey Nash, you in here?" asked a camper named Tim. Tim was Nash's friend and him and I met before. "Yeah," Nash replied. "I'm in the handicap stall at the end." I was praying Tim wasn't going to take up the stall closest to Nash, because that was the one with my white butt sticking up in it. Then Nash said something that made my heart drop like the shit I had just pinched out. "I wouldn't take the stall next to me though. Dan is bare butt naked and on the floor in there." Nash knew. He must have either opened my door and saw my booty, or looked underneath his stall and saw my gooch. I was dumbfounded and felt like a total idiot. I started wiggling my way back when Tim came over and opened the stall door. I got most of my butt on the other side of the stall wall, but Tim saw enough. Tim immediately went out to tell everybody about how I was dragging my pee-pee on the tiles with no pants on, and by the time I got dressed, a dozen older campers were trying to come in and see what was up. The head counselor Brian also came in to investigate, and he was waiting outside my stall as I opened it. I didn't bother to flush down my loaf, because I still wanted to salvage as much of this as I could. That backfired almost immediately, because as soon as Brian was finished looking at me, his eyes wandered to my tennis ball tube shit. The only word that gives his reaction any justice is flabbergasted. After getting his bearing, he told me to flush my shit, wash up, and meet him at the camp main office. That sounds doable, right? Wrong. Gigantashika's lived up to his name, and as the father of all other shits, a mere camp toilet bowl wouldn't bring him down. I flushed and flushed and flushed, but all the turd did was spin around like it was an Olympic ice skater. While this was happening, Brian was shooting dagger with his eyes, and the rest of the campers who could see were either laughing at me or in awe of my shit. Eventually Brian handed me a pair of medical gloves from the supply cabinet and simply said pick it up. I was hesitant, but I really didn't see any other option. The shit was pretty solid, and I cradled it like a child as Brian led me to the supply shed. I have never been so embarrassed in my life. Some of the guys thought it was hysterical, but almost everybody else, including the girl campers, were absolutely disgusted. Brian got a shovel and dug a little hole about 10 yards deep into the woods next to the supply shed. He told me to bury it, and with motherly care, I placed Gigantashika's in his shallow grave. "Wash up, I expect you to be at the office ASAP," Brian told me. All activity at the camp has stopped at the point, and a solid 150 campers/counselors were just staring at me. I was ashamed, and made my way back to the bathroom with my shit-covered gloves and the reddest face imaginable. I forced my husband at gunpoint to sign divorce papers. To begin with, I was a small-town girl brought up in a conservative family. I completed my graduation in engineering but didn't go for campus placement because my parents felt that would be an obstacle to get me married to a traditional and decent man. So despite protesting, I gave up to the emotional trauma given to me by parents and enrolled myself in MTech course. Knowing my parents' attitude towards life, they always felt that only few professions like teaching were meant for girls. I worked hard for GATE exam and my marks were enough to get me into the nearest NIT from my hometown. And mind you, I had literally tried everything, pleaded, begged, cried to let me continue my studies with the promise that I would marry the person of their choice without any demands and even leave studies if the groom's family didn't consider it appropriate. I had no other choice. My desire to study and complete post-graduation was making me do anything and everything. By God's grace, I could complete my post-graduation and even start teaching as an assistant professor in a private college while my elder sister and brother got married. I still remember it was the month of July, 5 years back, when my mother finally bought the unfortunate and wretched news. You will get to know why I call it unfortunate and wretched, of finding a suitable match for me. The guy was a manager in a steel factory. Moreover, the factory was owned by his family. I wasn't allowed to talk to him. According to my parents, they couldn't find someone better for me. I wish they could judge better. I got married in a traditional style. I had read about finding love or at least friendship after marriage, but I missed the initial gestures of both from my husband's side. I thought lovemaking would be when both of us were comfortable, but the first night itself I was forced to have intercourse. When I tried to show discomfort, he bluntly said that it was my virtue as a wife to satisfy his intimate needs. And I had to accept it as destiny. The next morning I woke up still hopeful of a happy married life, trying to convince myself it is the initial phase and I would soon be comfortable and happy. The first 3 months of marriage were weird. He would use me like an intimacy doll at night but did not even talk to me for any other reason except doing odd chores for him. Whenever I would try to initiate a conversation, he would ignore me and simply move to the other room. Although my mother-in-law visited us twice a month, she understood that everything wasn't right. Her loving attitude made me confess to her on how my efforts on trying to know him more go in vain. She requested me not to discuss it with my family as it would give them unnecessary tension and told me that it was normal in the beginning of arranged marriages. I was an optimist and despite him going for 2 trips with his friends but not taking me to honeymoon, thought maybe he would open up in a few months. He would be aggressive during intimacy, although I did show discomfort, but the day I protested, I was hurt verbally. He cleared to me that all he wanted from me was intimacy, and when I raised the issue of opening up and being friends he simply told me about his philosophy for his wife. Wife are meant to do household chores and satisfy husbands without expecting anything in return. I was shocked out of my wits. I tried to explain to him how we could lead a happy life by being more open to each other. But he rather told me not to try to interfere in his life. Days went by. Months too. I was sad and depressed but still hoped that someday he would pay attention to my emotional needs. He didn't allow me to work, to meet my friends, leave alone making friends, and the worst was locking me inside the flat for a week when he would go with his friends for trips. Once when I tried to request him not to lock me up he rather called me a characterless girl who wanted to meet men in absence of her husband. He would not let me meet my own family saying my absence disturbs his schedule. Tired of all this I tried to ask for help from my mother but alas she only said one thing: after marriage a girl must abide by her husband's needs and desires. I knew nothing that could make the situation better but all I wanted was this marriage should work. Once, one of my school friends found my husband with someone else in a party who he said was his wife. My friend forwarded me the picture. I was so scared. I just prayed to Lord that this must not be his other wife. By this you can realize how much I wanted this marriage hoax to work because I knew I would be held as culprit by everyone, if it didn't. The night that followed showed me true colors of my husband. On showing him the photo and asking, he replied by hitting me and warning me never ever to spy on him. This incident made me want to run away but all I could do was to cry. When I finally tried to talk to my elder sister, she was although concerned about me but did inform me how I would be disowned by my own family after separating from this man just to prevent the dishonor I would bring to the family. And guess what? Expect worse. I was caught by my husband telling about how I was physically abused after marriage, to my sister. And this time when he tried to beat me, I protested. And as a result of which he broke my phone, my only link with the outside world, and pushed me hard, just to make me bang my head on the table, the severity of which made me unconscious. He was kind enough to take me to the hospital, although later I realized it was not kind, but an obvious thing which anyone would have done. I got stitches, MRI reports showed clots on the right side, that's why I said it was obvious to take me to the hospital. And out of human nature I thought maybe now he would start caring for me. But I was wrong. But now after 5 years I feel grateful of him to not leave me to die, but take me to the hospital. There he simply told me, see I don't want to hit you. But if you don't obey, this is what you will get. All I want from you is to be like the way I want. And we will have a nice life. This was indeed the first time I lost all hope, and considering this as my fate started behaving accordingly. So the 9th month of my marriage went smoothly. Taking advantage of his good mood one night, while he was busy satisfying himself with my body, I requested him to allow me to work as a professor. And to make my idea more lucrative to him, I told him that this could reduce the expenditure he has to do on my basic needs and he could go to foreign trips with his friends. This sounded good to him. And fortunately in a month's time full of interviews and written tests I started teaching in an institute. This was my escape from the harsh reality of my married life where I was just used as a maid and a prostitute. In 5 months' time I started getting the emotional affection and companionship I expected from my husband from the hod. Please don't mistake this as falling in love. I found a friend who I could trust, talk to and expect from. After a month more, I started trusting him more and finally he became the first person to know in detail what all I had gone through in nearly a year and more of marriage. I would often ask him as to what I should do to make my husband more affectionate to me, and one day we finally concluded that a baby might change everything. I just didn't mention that once before this I had tried to discuss this matter with my husband, to which he replied he was already burdened by me so he doesn't want a baby. And one fine day I decided to try my luck, and guess what, I got pregnant. I kept this news from my husband till 8 weeks but he came to know this. And in rage, of betraying him, he didn't want a baby, he hit me again, despite pleading that it was his own child. And sadly I had a miscarriage. This was basically the first time. The pain and agony of losing my first baby made me determined to get out of this hell. I just took a week leave from work. It was during this time that my absence for so long made my colleague cum best friend realize his love for me. Now let us call him X, because most of the latter part would be about him. Out of care for me and knowing how my husband was, X reached my house and was in utter disbelief to see me in this pathetic state. I had wounds all over, my body was weak and my eyes were swollen. For the first time in a year and a half I saw my pain in someone else's eyes. He hugged me for the first time, confessed his love for me and promised me to get me out of this place at any cost. What followed for the next 3 months was, shifting to his home and being lovingly accepted by his mother, being disowned by my family, getting abused by my husband on being a whore, frequent visits to police station, lawyers and court. But believe me, at this time of turmoil I was happy, at peace and felt as if something beautiful was to happen, first time in nearly 2 years. During these days once when my husband started filing false cases against me like, harassing his old parents, having extramarital affairs, being a worker of a intimacy racket gang, yes, you read it right, he just wanted to pull me down anyhow. X and me found our law system incapable of differentiating between wrong and right. We made up a plan. As per the plan, we kidnapped him and made him sign a divorce papers at gunpoint. And used the property papers. He was given a large amount of ancestral property by his parents, as a bait to make him accept all his deeds, domestic violence and intimacy abuse, and also filing false cases against me, in court. Finally the paradise of my life began. I married X, we shifted along with his mother to other city. We started working in a new institute again. It has been 3 years and life has been simply a bliss. God has blessed me with a son, who is going to turn 2 this June. Maybe God is paying me back for all the pains I suffered, in the form of a beautiful life unfolding every day. Time has indeed healed all my wounds. I was and will always be grateful to X for being a guardian angel and the biggest blessing in disguise.
My husband's sister is in love with him plus update. My husband and I met each other at a ski lodge 9 years ago. Many mutual friends attended and there was a singing competition and both of us were set up by our friends to enter it. Sparks flew during our duet and the rest is history. This was the first time I caught on to my sister-in-law, Tina's, disturbing behavior. After the singing competition, he and I went to the cafe to chat. Tina came storming up to us and demanded he come back to their group. She never looked at me and whined when he shut her down. She ran off crying and apparently took her sister's room key cards and locked them out so they had to stay with the friends in their room. Fast forward to when we bought a house together. We had a housewarming and invited family and close friends. Tina showed up in a suggestive club outfit. She ignored me the entire time and hung all over my husband. She kept recalling tales of them when they were little and how close they were. She'd kiss him on the cheek, hug him, and touch his arm when laughing. He was visibly uncomfortable so I stepped in. She was going around reminding everyone that he used to say he never wanted to have kids, but now he's playing daddy to my daughter, as I have one from a previous marriage. One of my friends said she thought Tina was weird for talking about how hot his modeling photos were when he did print work back in college and that her favorite photo was of them at a beach in Hawaii during a family vacation a few years back. The most bizarre thing she told a few people was that he had never dated a woman of color before and now all of a sudden he's in love. Then things go south at the end of the night when he gets down on one knee and proposes to me. She started crying and ran to the restroom. Their dad went to check on her and then drove her home. My husband always equated her behavior to jealousy because she never had healthy relationships. After that tantrum, she skipped our wedding, baby shower, our children's birthday parties, and other family events that we attended. I was fine with extending invitations because I knew she wasn't going to show up. She had some sort of mental breakdown and was in and out treatment for years. I'm currently pregnant and our baby shower is at the end of this month. I'm having it a few months early because I'm at risk for going into labor early, like I did with my other 2 children. My mother-in-law called to RSVP and stated Tina would be riding with them and if it was okay if she brought her new boyfriend. I was surprised because we hadn't seen her in years, but I was apprehensive to agree. Eventually, I did agree and hoped that she resolved whatever caused her so much distress when she was around my family. Well, it took all of 24 hours for her to start her nonsense. She texted my husband paragraphs at 3 a.m. telling him how she felt about our family. First, she went on to say how much she missed them being close and how I came in and destroyed their close relationship, when I barely said 50 words to her in 9 years. She asked him if he was happy with his life because again, he used to say he never wanted kids or to get married. She then asked if he thought about her all this time and if he could meet up with him before the shower and talk alone, face to face. That was the last straw for me. I pressed my husband about it and tried resolving this weird issue. Apparently, my husband has known his sister has been mentally ill this way, as when she was 11, she asked if they could cuddle and kiss and he said no. He admits her behavior since then has always been weird and dramatic, but he didn't pay her much attention because there were many siblings and they all hung out all the time. I asked him if he could uninvite her and this new boyfriend because I think she's going to bring drama to our baby shower. He said he wants to talk to his parents first to see what kind of state she's been in, but I know in my gut that she's ready to ruin our day with her theatrics. Update: my husband ran home from work because Tina blew up his phone, texting and calling. Now, my husband always texts or calls me on his lunch break to check on me, even before the pregnancy, so I knew something was wrong when he didn't. Since he left Tina on read, she started calling and sending a slew of unwarranted and degrading texts about me and our children, so basically Tina being Tina. He didn't run it by me, but he sent her a long paragraph, which he showed me when he got home, basically telling her off and told her that he would rather never speak to her again than listen to her talk bad about our family. He told her she would never be invited to any of our family functions and that she needed to check herself back into the hospital if she thought their sibling relationship was ever closer than it actually was. He closed it by saying he would let the family know the reason she was uninvited and that he hoped she's either seeing a therapist or would find one immediately. I'm not surprised at his response because the things she said pushed him to that breaking point. I think the worst thing she said was that my miscarriage years ago, which would have been our first child together, was caused because we don't actually belong together and that my body couldn't even carry any of my children to term. I expected her to bring something like this up, but I could tell it really hurt him, and that's why he didn't hold back from her. He then blocked her and told me he's changing our phone numbers. He called his parents and the oldest sister, whom he is close with, and explained to them why she's never allowed to visit our home. He shared all of their text exchanges, and they were mortified. He asked them not to share our address and when we changed to new numbers. They assured us that none of them shared this information with her because she actually asked for his work schedule and mentioned driving up a day early to surprise him. My father-in-law had the most to say, and I get it. It's his baby girl, but he hadn't shared much info beforehand with anyone besides his wife. Apparently, the dad knew Tina always loved my brother but never saw anything too much of it, and came to accept Tina the way she was. A few years ago, they had a conversation about her behavior, and she told him that she had been keeping a diary about him since she was a teenager. She explained it was to process her emotions and to challenge negative thoughts. All I heard was that she wrote about him for years. So there's several journals in their home, probably enforcing her beliefs. Apparently, she only stayed away from my husband because my father-in-law kept her in check and was able to get her hospitalized several times for being a threat to herself. They told us they would deal with her and apologized for thinking she had resolved her issues. My in-laws are saints, and I thank them for believing us and keeping her away for all these years. Luckily, she's currently living with them due to her issues, so they're going to speak to her tomorrow morning. The other sister-in-law called me when we got off the phone with the in-laws. She told me that she was really sorry because she's the one who hooked the new boyfriend and Tina up and suggested that she show him off at the baby shower, but admitted they had only been dating for like 2 weeks. She said she sent the text Tina sent to my husband to her then boyfriend, so I'm pretty sure they're probably not a thing anymore. I'm kind of nervous how Tina will deal with 2 rejections so close together. The 2 sisters aren't that close, and she was audibly disgusted to find out that her sister has been pining for their brother all these years. She has a theory though. She thinks it started with the older brother, Sean, because when Tina was little, she would follow Sean around all the time. He's older, so he went off to college abroad. Tina was about 10, and then he permanently moved to Europe. It seems like the crush transferred to my husband when Sean left. She suspects Tina has just severe psychological issues and does not see a problem with having a crush on your brother. Sean hasn't been back to the States since he graduated high school, and no one really has contact with him, so she said she can't call and ask him about it. I have to admit I'm kind of curious and would have been interested in hearing what Sean had to say, but I'll rest assured knowing our involvement in the whole thing is over. Edit. We just got a call from the older sister. Tina found out she will never contact my husband again and was devastated. So much so, that she took her own life. Rest in peace, Tina. You were a psychopath, but suicide is no way to go. My climate change activist husband spent all my money on a new Tesla to save the environment, and now I'm struggling to pay for my daughter's education. Me and my husband met in college. I was pursuing an incredibly academically rigorous route to become a lawyer, whereas my husband was getting his degree in environmental sciences. My husband and I really connected as people, and so we got married soon after college. Only a year later I got pregnant with our first daughter. I love nothing more than our daughter, but I also am a really career-oriented person, so after her we haven't tried to have any more kids. My husband, on the other hand, said that he wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. This arrangement worked really well for us, and it made our life really convenient. Up until this year when I got my huge salary raise, but it also came with more work hours. Now I would barely see my husband and daughter as much, and most of our conversations were about climate change, because my husband was absolutely fascinated by it. Now one thing that's important is that we invest most of my money into our daughter's education because she goes to a very expensive private school. My husband during this period of time said that he wanted to make some minor changes to our lifestyle, so that we could be a lot more environmentally friendly. Of course I had no problem with that, and was always looking to help out my community. However, when this type of behavior starts to interfere drastically with my lifestyle, that's when I have an issue with it. At first it was just switching to reusing more of our stuff, and buying second-hand clothing, then it turned to buying more eco-friendly products. Then my husband started volunteering. Now again I have nothing wrong with pitching in to help the community, but this was totally messing up my schedule, and our daughter was now consistently getting picked up late from school. I tried to talk to my husband about this, but he just started to say, "Oh, I'm sorry for trying to help save the planet. Do you know how many animals and habitats are destroyed by the actions of people like you?" I let it drop because obviously I was glad that my husband found something that he was passionate about, and in the end we developed a much better system for taking care of our child. Later that week is when the second incident happened. My daughter called me from her dad's phone and started complaining about how dad was making her take cold showers. I asked her to pass the phone to him, and demanded he explain himself. He said that hot water was not a very eco-friendly thing and it was overall beneficial for the family to start taking cold showers. I said that there was absolutely no way that the whole family would be taking cold showers, and that if he wanted to he could, but neither me or my daughter would. Me and my husband weren't communicating that much at this point, and because of my terrible schedule now, which happened because my husband wanted to do more activism, now I have to pick up my daughter. Not to mention the crazy long work days I would barely get to see my husband. I had to keep on funding his desire to be an activist, and let's just say it wasn't cheap. One day while I was at the office I saw a huge deduction on our bank account. I immediately contacted the bank and tried to report some sort of fraud, but they informed me that it was my husband who had made a car purchase. When I got home I saw a brand new white Tesla sitting in our driveway and my husband was doing a photo shoot for it. I couldn't believe it and immediately started questioning him about what this was. I was in so much shock that he did something this big without telling me. Considering I was the main breadwinner of the family, and I paid for it. My husband couldn't stop talking the whole night about how good of an investment this was. He was on his phone posting on his Reddit and Facebook about his new car to all his eco-friendly groups. As I was frantically looking over our bank statements, I realized that this put us in a terrible financial situation. We already paid more than 5 figures yearly for our child's education, and this on top of that could really put us in a bad situation. I confronted my husband about this. While we were all getting in bed I told him that either he gets a job today and pays back what he owes, or else I'm divorcing him and selling the Tesla. What he did next was crazy.
My husband of 9 years just slapped me for the first time today in front of our son. Should I slap him back to show my husband that he will get the boomerang treatment if he hits me again and to show our son that his mother isn't scared of his dad? I thought long and hard about answering this, but here goes. I am answering as a 58-year-old woman who witnessed her father hitting her mother as far back as I can remember. As far back as I can remember. Those are the relevant words. I have a few other hazy memories of when I was very young. Our dog, Topper. Our cat, Arthur. But over and above all of them, my father hitting my mother. Not just a slap, but knocking her to the floor. You see, my father drank. When he was sober, he was the nicest man alive. Get alcohol into him, and he turned into a monster. This went on for years, until I got to an age where I would try to get between them. Then I got it too. Some weeks I couldn't go to school because the bruises were so bad. One New Year's Eve, when I was 15, they came home from a works party, and he started. For once my mother fought back, and I ran out of the house in my nightgown, looking for help, and was lucky enough to run into a passing police car. By the time I got back to the house with the police, there was blood all up the stairs, my kid brother and sister awake and terrified, and both my mother and father were carted off to hospital, leaving me to deal both with two very scared little kids and to clean up all the mess. Did it stop after that incident? No, of course not. My father still drank, my mother and I still got battered, until one day a couple of years later. I was 17, had recently started work, and got home that day to find my mother, sister and brother hiding in the garage. All three of them had punch marks. Yes, my father had been drinking again. My mother begged me not to go into the house, but that day, something in me finally snapped. I marched into the house, and my father came at me. He landed a couple of punches, driving me back into the kitchen, until I backed into the cooker. Without even considering it, I grabbed the handle of a pressure cooker, a hefty bit of kit, and swung it at him as hard as I could. He hit the deck. Out cold. Turns out I'd broken his jaw in 2 places. What a shame. I left him lying on the floor, and went to get my mother, brother and sister. My mother was shocked to see me, and couldn't believe I'd walked out relatively unscathed, and when I told her what I'd done, she almost ran into the house to see for herself. My father had started to come round, and was moaning that he needed to go to hospital. My mother said she'd take him, and he rather unsteadily got to his feet. He almost flinched when he looked at me, and that was when the last of my fear of him left me. He was a bully, just a drunken bully, and like all bullies he could be stood up to. I took a step towards him and said, quite calmly, if you ever hit any of us again, I will off you in your sleep. He clearly believed I meant it, because he never again raised his fist to any of us. Years later, talking about it with my mother, I remarked that he must have believed me. My mother gave a little smile and said, not just him. I believed you. I guess what I'm saying with this story is, don't make your son be me. Don't make him grow up with memories of his father hitting his mother, don't put him into the position where he will try to defend you. Once a man starts hitting a woman, it's a slippery slope. Leave. Or make him leave. The year in which I finally stood up to my father and decided no more was 1978. For many women like my mother, there was no help. Families might know that this kind of thing went on, but it wasn't talked about. I also want to refute any suggestions that my mother was a weak woman. My mother was trapped. My father was 10 years older, and had abused the trust of a young, innocent girl, got her pregnant, and was forced to marry her too. Escaped prison. My mother was 15 when I was born, 3 months before her 16th birthday. They were married 2 days after her birthday. She had no choice. Again, these were very different times. A year after I finally stood up to my father, my grandmother passed away. She left her house to my mother. Finally, my mother had somewhere to go, and she took that chance like a shot. Although my father had never used his fists again, he had resorted to verbal abuse. Some of the things he would say were truly awful, and in its own way verbal abuse can be as bad, if not sometimes worse, than physical abuse. I had been offered a job at the other end of the country, and my mother finally having her own place, and an escape, allowed me to pursue my dream. We all moved on. A couple of years after she left my father, my mother met a wonderful man. They were together until he sadly passed away from cancer 3 years ago. He was a fantastic husband to my mother, a brilliant stepfather, and a fabulous grandfather to my children. He was truly a gentleman, and a gentleman. I am only 4 feet 10. My father was not a tall man, but the day I stood up to him I wouldn't have cared if he was 6 feet 10. I wasn't thinking about anything except this is going to stop. Seeing my mother, brother and sister cowering in the garage, on a freezing cold day, shivering and too scared to get any warmer clothes was the final straw. For those who have commented that they have lived through very similar events, I am truly sorry. I do understand your pain, and the scars, both mental and physical, that it leaves behind. I have sometimes wondered how different my life would have been if none of that had happened, but I finally realized that it has shaped the person I am today, and I like the person I am today. Since that day I have never been afraid to stand my ground, to stand up for what I believe to be right, and to speak up for those too afraid to speak for themselves. I am speaking to those of you now who have similar scars. You were a child. It was not your fault. My unbearable wife left and now I want her annoying self back. She's back to being a pain in my butt. The progress my wife made was somewhat slow. Firstly, I want to explain to you my relationship with my wife's mother. Me and her were friendly, I respected her as a mother figure to my wife and a somewhat mother figure to me, but she didn't really like me. She was friendly to me, never had an argument with her, it wasn't something personal with me, but she didn't really like my presence. I think it had to do with the fact that she didn't trust men anymore because of my wife's father. But, although she didn't like me, she respected me as her daughter's partner and accepted me and even gave me good advice in life. She is way better now, still not her full self, but she started being a bit annoying. After some of your advice I decided to wait a bit to prank her, until I thought she was ready for a prank. After like 1 month one morning I woke up before her, got out of bed, went to her side of the bed and started fast kissing her cheeks waiting for her to wake up. When she woke up she looked at me a bit confused and asked what I was doing. I just got on top of her, took her in for a hug and started kissing her more. After like 10 seconds I stopped. I didn't want to lay on her very much to not make her feel unsafe or uncomfortable, got up and yelled I love you. Her reaction was very good, she giggling the whole time I was kissing her, and after I yelled she said that she loves me too. I then told her I'm going to make some coffee for both of us, and you guessed it, I salted her coffee. She again reacted very well and spit it all out and started laughing hysterically. In my opinion that made her a bit better, but she was understandably still very sad. But her first prank was unexpected and very funny. After like another month of me doing little pranks on her, mostly yelling I love you and very rarely salt in her coffee, she took revenge, and so she did. I don't know what she got, but it was some type of chocolate cake that when you poke it with a knife it explodes in your face. I didn't know what the occasion for cake was, but hey, it was cake, so I didn't suspect anything, and so I tried cutting it up and it exploded on my face. My wife was of course laughing very hard, and I just got the rest of the cake that was on the table and slapped it, gently of course, not a full-on slap, on her face, and so we were both covered in chocolate cake. We were laughing so hard we both fell on the floor, and after a few minutes we started hugging each other on the floor and stayed like that for like an hour. I don't know why we did that instead of cleaning ourselves up first, but it was amazing. Smiles now. She's still very sad, but she started being annoying again, not that much though, and she's overall way better than when she was when I first posted on here. But, the biggest surprise, is that she is pregnant. With a girl. Yes, she is going to be a mother, and I'm going to be a father. We are both so excited and we already know the name of our precious daughter. My wife asked me, a bit scared, if we can name our daughter, her mother's name. And I of course said yes, because firstly it's my wife's most important person's name, or second after our daughter, and secondly, it's a very pretty name. So yeah, this is the update. My wife is excited to be a mother, but very upset that her mother isn't going to meet her first grandbaby. I'm glad she is way better now than 7 months ago, and I'm very proud of her because she's a very strong woman and a very amazing wife, and I don't doubt that she's going to be an even more amazing mother. Am I the a-hole for expecting my date to cover the cleaning cost of a dress he ruined? I, 27F, am in a bit of a dilemma and could really use some advice. I've been seeing this guy for a couple months, and we decided to go to a nice high-end restaurant for a date. Initially I was going to wear a nice dark blue dress that I like to wear out, but he asked me to wear a different white dress that I had shown him once as it matched his outfit. I've never had a guy ask me this. The white dress in question was a gift from my late grandmother and was quite expensive, so I was reluctant but agreed and just asked that we didn't go anywhere after where I might spill something on it or otherwise mess it up. He mentioned clubbing after dinner, which is why I said that. I didn't want to risk messing the dress up, and he said we could just go to dinner and I could change out of it before doing anything else. Great. However, the evening took a turn for the worse when he accidentally spilled his red wine all over my dress. He had gotten an unexpected call, and when he tried to quickly mute his ringer, his elbow hit his glass and it spilled all over the lap area of my dress before I could react. It was completely drenched and stained. He was apologetic at the time, and I tried to be cool about it, but inside, I was devastated, especially since I had mentioned specifically how I wanted to be careful wearing it. Later, I mentioned to him that the dress was very expensive and asked if he'd be willing to help with the cost of cleaning and placing it. To get it professionally cleaned and the stain removed would cost $100, which I asked him to pay half of. To my surprise, he got quite defensive. He argued that it was an accident and that I was being unreasonable for expecting him to pay for something like that, and that it was my fault for wearing it out knowing that it could have happened. I feel like it's a matter of principle. Yes, it was an accident, but the dress is ruined, and it was extremely sentimental to me, not to mention a valuable dress. He thinks I'm being materialistic and making a big deal out of nothing. Now, I'm not sure how to feel about his reaction. Am I the a-hole for expecting him to cover the cost? My sister attacked my wife, and my mom is holding our financial documents hostage because of it. My wife and I have been together since December 2019. Ever since then, we have had nothing but problems with my family, particularly my mom and my one sister, as well as occasionally my brother, sister-in-law, and dad. My wife and I have talked multiple times in the past few years about whether we feel like it has gotten to the point of us needing to go no contact, but haven't pulled the trigger quite yet. This past weekend, however, and the aftermath, are having us seriously consider it. My wife and I were asked to help with a home project for my brother and sister-in-law's new house. The only supplies that were brought for said project was one single paint sprayer, and one single roll of painting tape, even though we had 7 people at various points who were there to help. My wife, my mom, my sister-in-law, and I started taping up the parts that needed covering, and my brother started painting behind us. There wasn't a whole lot to tape, so once we finished there wasn't anything to do other than sit around and wait. Eventually my sister starts painting, and my wife and I decide around 7 p.m. that it would probably be smart to try to order food for everyone. My wife is with one group on one side of the year talking about food orders, and I am on the other side with my mom and sister. My wife heard them yelling, and concerned that something was happening, so she came over and asked what was going on. Here is a play-by-play of this conversation. Sister, hands me paint sprayer, your turn. Me, oh, okay. I thought I was supposed to go get food? Sister, too bad. Mom, I did ask you to help paint. Me, well, I did help tape. Mom, well, I didn't ask you to help tape, I asked you to help paint? Didn't I? Me, I suppose. Wife, what are you guys yelling about? Mom, oh, we were just giving him crap. Wife, oh, okay, it just sounded like yelling. Sister, he can talk to his family. Without you. It's none of your effing business. Wife, huh? Sister, you have no right to be at effing beach to my mom, it's none of your business, and he can talk to his family without you around. Wife, I was just asking a question about my husband, is there a problem with that? Sister, you don't get to talk to my mom like that, you beach. Wife, again, I was asking a simple question about my husband. Sister takes a couple steps towards wife walks towards sister is literally centimeters from wife's face, wife places her hand on sister's chest and tells her to back off, and then sister starts swinging. Basically, my sister started swinging on my wife, and my wife put her hands up to block her face and accidentally landed a blow on my sister in the face. After this, I pulled my sister back, and my wife stepped back. My sister was yelling things like she hurt me, call the cops etc. After my sister eventually seemed to calm down, I let her go, and she lunged at my wife again, and this time got a swing in. I pulled her back again, and then my brother and sister-in-law walked up and started yelling at my wife. Sister-in-law says that my wife is making them look like trash to their new neighbors, and my brother tells us to get off his property. My mom started yelling at my wife telling her she was being a beach, and that she had no right to come at her like that, even though my wife hadn't even moved yet from the spot where she was standing. Fast forward, over the past few days we have gotten many text messages and phone calls. The gist of those is basically continuing to blame my wife, and telling me that I am a terrible brother, son, and uncle. Additionally, we need some old tax forms for some financial paperwork we need to fill out, and while my wife's parents sent those to us as soon as they were able, my parents are holding them hostage and flat out refusing to give them to us. I was told that I would have to drive an hour to their house to retrieve them. And have a conversation with my mom, and that my wife was not welcome to this conversation. Additionally, my wife is no longer welcome in their house. When we called and asked if my mom could please just email them to us, we need them, her exact response was maybe. Withholding our financial documents feels like it should be a last straw for me, but it's really hard, and I want to make the right choice.
My cheating boyfriend slept with my sister 2 days before our wedding, so I dumped him and took a trip to Europe with his money. It's been a week since I broke my wedding off with my cheating fiancé and ran off to Europe. There's a few things that I want to clarify. Apparently, me booking that trip emptied his bank account. But since I have blocked him on everything, he's been trying to reach me through mutual friends. Although, after I explained the situation to them, they were more than happy to block him too. So he's been losing friends on top of his marriage. As for my sister, she's been sending me texts and voicemails, apologizing for her actions and begging me to come back. She's telling me to think of all the money we put into the wedding, and how it's all going to waste. But little does she know, I never put a single cent in from my pocket. I haven't blocked her because honestly, her suffering gives me satisfaction. The entire family has decided to cut her off and ignore her like she's the plague. I told my parents everything even before I left, and thankfully they are on my side. They even called me yesterday informing me that they are going to cut my sister off from their will and inheritance. As for how I am doing, I would love to say that I'm enjoying Europe to the fullest without any on my mind, but that would be a lie. I'm still having trouble sleeping because I keep remembering what I saw. I even tried hooking up with a European guy, but it didn't help and in fact just made it worse. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I am still engaged, so what I did was actually cheating. It made me so disgusted that I had to throw up and tell him to leave. I guess even though my now ex was a betraying backstabber, I can't do what he said even if it's to get back at him. But regardless, there's still a lot of time left, and I'm going to do my best to enjoy my relaxed trip. Also, my ex has decided not to press any charges on how I used his card for this. Apparently, he's still holding on to some hope that I will come back and forgive him. But that will never happen. I will remember what he did until the day I pass away, and will never forgive him. Not only did he cheat on me, he also destroyed 4 years of my life.
What's your worst summer camp experience? I took a huge stinking shit at the summer camp I had just started attending, and I was like 13, so I thought that I'd brag to all the guys about it. I named it Gigantashicus, and that name didn't even do justice to my fecal child. It was easily 13 inches long and was a little less thick than an Arizona iced tea can. To somebody who was 13, this was like a blessing from God. Imagine how cool my bunk mates would think I was when I showed them the shit to end all shits. I was ecstatic. I rolled on the ground to the stall next to me, while my pants weren't on and I had a dirty butt. I didn't want the toilet paper to cover up my magnificent baby after all. So I shimmy into the other stall and start wiping. I wasn't really focused on anything but wiping and then gathering my friends for a show and tell, so the thought of locking the stall I was currently in slipped my mind. So I had no pants on, I was giggling because I was so excited, and I was wiping my butt in an unlocked stall. Not the best situation to be in. Luckily I finished my wipe and decided to slide back under stall walls to the original Holy Land. I crawled about halfway into the other stall when I heard the door that takes you into the bathroom open. I was dead still because I didn't want anyone to get suspicious and start snooping around. I watched with bated breath as the pair of size 11 boots made their way across floor towards the stalls. I recognized those work boots, they belonged to a big dumb farm boy named Nash. Nash was really big, really dumb, and really didn't like me. It felt like an eternity as he did his big dumb shuffle across the line of stalls. He finally was out of my vision and all I could do was pray. His footsteps stopped somewhere near the stall I was half out of, and I hear the creaking of a stall door. Nash had gone into the stall next to the one I was climbing out of. Nash took a shit that I'm sure rivaled mine, Seeing as half the food budget at camp was labeled for Nash. I was starting to get really uncomfortable laying on the ground, so I decided I could risk slowly crawling back into Gigantashika's holding pen. I started my methodical slither when the bathroom door opened again. "Hey Nash, you in here?" asked a camper named Tim. Tim was Nash's friend and him and I met before. "Yeah," Nash replied. "I'm in the handicap stall at the end." I was praying Tim wasn't going to take up the stall closest to Nash, because that was the one with my white butt sticking up in it. Then Nash said something that made my heart drop like the shit I had just pinched out. "I wouldn't take the stall next to me though. Dan is bare butt naked and on the floor in there." Nash knew. He must have either opened my door and saw my booty, or looked underneath his stall and saw my gooch. I was dumbfounded and felt like a total idiot. I started wiggling my way back when Tim came over and opened the stall door. I got most of my butt on the other side of the stall wall, but Tim saw enough. Tim immediately went out to tell everybody about how I was dragging my pee-pee on the tiles with no pants on, and by the time I got dressed, a dozen older campers were trying to come in and see what was up. The head counselor Brian also came in to investigate, and he was waiting outside my stall as I opened it. I didn't bother to flush down my loaf, because I still wanted to salvage as much of this as I could. That backfired almost immediately, because as soon as Brian was finished looking at me, his eyes wandered to my tennis ball tube shit. The only word that gives his reaction any justice is flabbergasted. After getting his bearing, he told me to flush my shit, wash up, and meet him at the camp main office. That sounds doable, right? Wrong. Gigantashika's lived up to his name, and as the father of all other shits, a mere camp toilet bowl wouldn't bring him down. I flushed and flushed and flushed, but all the turd did was spin around like it was an Olympic ice skater. While this was happening, Brian was shooting dagger with his eyes, and the rest of the campers who could see were either laughing at me or in awe of my shit. Eventually Brian handed me a pair of medical gloves from the supply cabinet and simply said pick it up. I was hesitant, but I really didn't see any other option. The shit was pretty solid, and I cradled it like a child as Brian led me to the supply shed. I have never been so embarrassed in my life. Some of the guys thought it was hysterical, but almost everybody else, including the girl campers, were absolutely disgusted. Brian got a shovel and dug a little hole about 10 yards deep into the woods next to the supply shed. He told me to bury it, and with motherly care, I placed Gigantashika's in his shallow grave. "Wash up, I expect you to be at the office ASAP," Brian told me. All activity at the camp has stopped at the point, and a solid 150 campers/counselors were just staring at me. I was ashamed, and made my way back to the bathroom with my shit-covered gloves and the reddest face imaginable.